I have these conversations with these kids, and a lot of times it's because they're so turned off to what the parent perceives as being healthy. They're so turned off to it because they're turned off to the entire belief system of our value based on our size kind of thing. And so this affects kids that are at a high weight naturally, or kids that weren't at a high weight naturally, either one. But again, that original study showed it didn't matter if they were high weight kids or they're not high weight kids. They're equally affected. They're, by this parental perception. And so you can take a child that doesn't have a high weight and they end up at a high weight.
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. So good to see you
Great
two.
To be here.
Hi.
All right, on the show this week, we're going to talk about the connection between perception and thinking of a parent and the result that has on the weight of a child. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about. But the larger issue that we're going to be talking about is how thinking and perception actually has an impact on our metabolism. This is for what's that?
For real.
For real. I love it. Okay, so Dr. Cooper, this sounds like it can't even be a thing.
But it is.
But when we think about how we evolved over time, we're tribal creatures. We had many periods of scarcity in our history, and we had to survive in spite of all of that. So set the baseline, if you would, about why thinking and perception is such an important driver of metabolism.
It really is, because it feeds into all the information that our brain has that it uses to determine our energy status, meaning, are we secure nutritionally? Are we at risk of running out of fuel? Are we at risk of, just expending energy beyond our means? And so, of course, our thoughts and our perceptions are taken into account within that system. It's not as though our thoughts and perceptions are separate from all of what drives our metabolic systems, because the way that it works really is our brain, our hypothalamus especially is that high center of the brain, and that's what receives a lot of those input signals from our body about the status of our fuel supply, our nutritional environment, the hormones that our body's putting out that are informing about our nutritional security, our body weight, our food, incoming food and meals, and the content of those. And so that all kind of gets to our hypothalamus, including all the levels in our body of every nutrient, basically. And so it's sensing all of that information, and it takes that into consideration when it's going to be releasing other chemicals that inform the rest of our brain of whether we should be burning fuel or storing fuel, whether we should be slowing the metabolism down to conserve energy, or just green light, just go for it, spend whatever you want kind of thing. And so within that system, the other part that it looks at is two other parts. One is going to be our limbic system plays a role. That's our emotional side of things. And the other aspect is really more just our thinking part and our planning and what we're planning to do. So it's taking into account whether we're planning on doing any kind of exercise, whether we're planning on physically exerting ourselves and spending energy, whether we know that it's going to be a long time before we're able to eat because of something that we're planning to do. I mean, it's aware of all of this. And it's also aware of our emotional status in terms of our emotional perception of our body. So there is something called body image dissatisfaction that's looked at in research, and there have been numerous studies looking at the impact of body image dissatisfaction on that metabolic system and on our basic metabolic hormonal system, and whether when we feel dissatisfied with our body, in terms of feeling like, we don't like that number on the scale. It looks too high. It looks like I better do something to lower that number. Or if we don't like the way clothing's fitting or the way we look in the mirror, and it has to do with our body size. that feeds into that body image dissatisfaction, the sense of that. And our brain is aware of that. And so as it's analyzing the nutritional status and what our plans are, it's also looking at how willing are we to fuel our body. And so if we have the body image dissatisfaction scores, really high, it's not trusting that we will fuel our body.
Because you probably won't.
It's kind of looking at, well, I've got to defend against this tendency to try to restrain or restrict our energy input, to try to manipulate the number on the scale or the way we look in the mirror, that kind of thing. So it isn't woo, it's a real science. And there have been numerous studies looking at this because they have shown that things like something called the eating restraint index. Eating restraint index is when you're eating a meal and you're feeling guilty about eating it. And you're like thinking, I shouldn't be eating this because it's going to increase my weight, or it's going to do something to my body that it shouldn't do, that I don't want it to do in terms of my body size. So if you're thinking I should be exercising while you're eating, thinking these things, that's eating restraint index.
And could it even be something as simple as, you feel guilty that you're eating the bun along with your hamburger?
Oh, yeah, totally. It doesn't have to be like to the level of an eating disorder kind of thing. Yeah, it can be just any kind of something like that. And so it's just that our brain's so sensitive, it's taking into consideration all this stuff, and then it decides, okay, what should we do? Should we slow that metabolic rate down to conserve energy because we don't trust the situation, or should we just green light it? And so that has been shown. Now, all the mechanisms of how it's doing it haven't necessarily been shown, but that's why I really love this thing. It's called the milkshake study, because they actually did look at the numbers a little bit more and measure things to see how people were changing based on their perceptions. And so it was a great study where they gave people a milkshake, and they either told them that they called it a high calorie indulgent milkshake, or that it was a sensible low calorie milkshake. That's the terms I think they used. And the actual milkshake was the same. So there was no difference in this milkshake. And then they measured their ghrelin levels, which is that hunger hormone, before and after consuming the milkshake. And normally when we have a meal, our ghrelin, the hunger hormone, is supposed to go down afterwards. So it's up before we've eaten, and then when we eat, the meal reduces it, and so it goes down. But the people that were told that it was a sensible low-calorie milkshake, it didn't go down. So that's really interesting, because if it doesn't go down, now that downstream, that's going to start impairing your metabolic function, because then your body is going to think that you're too hungry. And so then it will start slowing your metabolic rate, jacking up your appetite later. So just the perception of that can throw you into a metabolic dysfunction. That's why sometimes like reading food labels can be kind of weird too, because it can trigger metabolic disruption most likely as well. If you think that, something is low or high calorie, and who knows if those are even accurate. Maybe the food labels in the markets are, but I mean on menus and things like that. But in any case, I think being too obsessed with a lot of that can introduce the risk to your metabolic system. But I hope that makes sense. Like, people think that, what? That can't possibly be true. But maybe if you think about like how the body works as an organism, and we're not unique as humans, I'm sure that every animal species would respond the same way. I don't know if animal species have disordered body image or any of that, but
I don't know if lions go around thinking, oh my God, that lion is so fat.
I don't know, but
no more roadkill for you.
But that's the way it affects us personally. And so we have to be careful about our own perceptions of our body. But if we feel that way, we feel that way. But you got to work it out. Like, why do you feel that way? And is there something you can do to overcome that? Work with professionals on that.
But I see so many times over the years couples who will say, "Yeah, we're on this new kick. We're eating less and we're exercising more, and we're counting the calories." And it's just this scarcity mindset, and that's got to be unhealthy for the brain.
Yeah.
Well, and then the parents also translate that to the kids. You
Yeah.
know, when they're saying, "Oh, look at little Joe, look at little Susie, uh-oh, roly poly," or they call him big, you know, big Big Joe, or what, you know, like they have cute little names, but it's not good.
And that's kind of the heart of this episode, is this study that looked at the perception of parents and that impact on the body weight of children. So, Dr. Cooper, if you could kind of break that study down.
Yeah.
This really gets at the heart of how important it is to have a healthy mindset when it comes to our body shape and size and weight, because how we think and how we perceive and how we communicate to our kids actually has a profound impact on their outcome, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Well, how many parents look in the mirror while their kids are in the room and say, "Oh my God, I look so fat in these pants," and your kids are hearing that. You know, so that's one way it starts. The next way it starts is like where, I mean, and I don't think that my parents did it thinking that they were being mean to me. I mean, they did it with love, you know, putting me on diets when I was, you know, 7, 8 years old. It wasn't done with malice. It was done like with my doctors, like, "Oh, the kid's fat. We better put her on a diet." You know, they didn't mean for it to be mean. And it was funny because I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she said her mom put her on Weight Watchers when she was 7, and when she would lose weight, she would get a gold star on her chart, and now she has PTSD when she sees those gold stars.
Oh my gosh.
Like, she said, "If I see a gold star of any sort, I get
I
PTSD.
can understand
boy.
I cannot see a gold star."
Well, Andrea, when you were a kid, though, what was that like? Because I can't even get my head around what that feeling must have been like as a child. Did you see yourself as the problem? Did you see food as the
Yeah.
problem? What was going
Well,
through
I
your
knew
head?
that the other kids didn't have to have that kind of sandwich with a half bread and with that stuff. Like, how come the other kids didn't have a problem? They ate more than me, and they didn't have the problem. I did maybe more exercise and more everything else, and they were telling me to exercise more, but somehow I was the fatty, and I don't, you know, I was like, why is it me? Why do I have this problem? And it was never like, oh, you know, something's wrong. It was like, well, you better eat less. You're eating too much. So it was like the portions were cut smaller and smaller and smaller, and then the things I could eat were different, you know, from the other people. And it was like, it was my fault. You know, it was definitely my fault. And, you know, it sucked because, like, I couldn't sometimes go to the same clothing stores as everybody else. I couldn't do the same thing. You know, it wasn't fun. It was definitely not fun. You definitely were ostracized. And in my time, they did do the weighing in front of the class. You know, they would weigh the whole class. And so you were like, "Oh, I'm the shortest and in the higher weight." It was like you would panic when it was the weighing time. Panic.
But when it came to your parents and what they said to you about your
It wasn't
weight,
good.
were they commenting?
My mother was always concerned about her weight. My mother was on, you know, diet pills, and she was always concerned about food and about what she ate, because my mother was obsessed with good food. I mean, we always ate really good food. We never ate bad stuff. We never ate from you know, we had a garden. It was go out and pick the salad. We always ate really well-cooked food. So it wasn't about what we ate. I never, you know, it was never like, "Oh, she's eating potato chips and cookie." No, I never did that. So it was never like, "Oh, she better cut back on the cake and cook." That wasn't the problem. did I eat more than the other kids? No. So that wasn't the issue. So nobody ever looked to see, was there a problem? I never had like when I was 7 or 8, there was no blood test. There was no, but I don't know if that was anything that anybody ever knew to do. I mean, maybe the doctor knew, but my parents didn't know. And my dad was overweight, but he would just go along with whatever diet we were doing. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah. And I think society has always been more forgiving of men who are overweight
Yeah.
as opposed to women who are overweight. Dr.
Oh,
Cooper,
definitely.
when people come, you've had a lot of parents and kids come to your office and the initial consultation. I mean, how does this play out? I'm guessing that most parents are completely unaware of the impact of their perception of their kids and the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are not aware. Some are. Some are really careful to try to isolate their own concerns from their child. But I think a lot of them, as Andrea said, are doing what they think they should be doing out of concern and have
Right.
been trying to, get their kids to exercise more and eat less. They're perceiving
Right.
that they have some weight issue. And sometimes it's like the child doesn't even have any weight issue at all. And that's, I think, what the core of this research paper that came out quite a while ago, but I like that one because there's several of them. There's a lot of them that look at parental perception of their own body and how that impacts their child's future weight, or at least maybe how it's associated with their child's future weight, and then also parental perception of their child's body weight and how that impacts or is associated with their child's future weight. And so this particular article was looking at the parental perception of their child's weight, and they looked at parents who perceived that their child's weight was elevated. And some of those children did have what would be considered elevated weight, and some of them did not at all have an elevated weight. And they tracked that and found that over time, the children with the normal weight, their weight increased, and as much as the other children that already did have a higher weight. So they were saying that the parental perception of their child at a high weight, for even the children that didn't have a high weight, led to that child eventually having an abnormally high weight. And so it kind of had the opposite impact. The parent concern about their child's weight seemed to have caused the child's weight to increase, or at least been a causative factor. And so,
Right, because the kid's brain is saying subconsciously, we might not be able to eat as much in the future because mom and dad is saying that I'm eating too much and I'm not getting enough exercise. So it calls into question
right.
the certainty of enough fuel down the road, right?
So
Exactly.
the kid's body thinks they're starving.
Right. And in that particular study, they didn't look at what actually ended up happening, but then there were other studies that were done that showed that parental concern about the body weight does lead to restricting the child's food intake often and kind of over pushing exercise. When I say over pushing, people will say, how can you over push exercise? But remember, we always say,
I
if
see
you
it.
don't fuel your exercise, you shouldn't be doing it. So under-fueled exercise would be over pushing the exercise. And also just making insinuations about, maybe you shouldn't eat this and you should be going out and exercising more. I mean, there's nothing wrong with encouraging exercise. I don't mean to sound like that, but it's the children pick up on that. Their system does. And just as we talked about our own emotional system feeding in, well, their emotions are affected too. And so now they're starting to perceive that there's this concern by the parent. And a lot of adults actually will tell me that they didn't have any concern about their weight at all when they were growing up until a parent or a doctor or someone else said something about it. And that's what started them on a path of restricting their food and all this other stuff that actually led to more weight gain. So so I think some of these studies have shown a couple of different things. After, that original one we talked about, they looked to try to find some mechanisms, and one of them did seem to be that the parental restraint on the eating was directly impacting the child's, creating that opposite effect of their metabolism conservation mechanisms. And in kids, that can be really powerful. Like the diets in kids can have been shown to really reduce their metabolic rate and also to lead to future obesity. I mean, that has been shown again and again and again. But part of the reason is that they're developing. And so that's a very high energy demand period, especially, for girls age 9 to 14, for boys maybe 10 to 17. It's so critical for them to be fueling well because they're going to be growing taller, developing a lot of different, reproductive hormone function and things like that, brain development, emotional development. It all requires a lot of fuel. And so anything that you're doing that's restricting them during that time frame is going to have a bigger impact. And in things like full-blown eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, we also see that for children that are affected in those growth development periods, they have a much more severe disease and a more long-term recovery because it has a bigger impact on their metabolism. So because of this restriction during this developmental period where the fuel needs are so high. So anyway, they've done these studies, and another one that was really interesting, which I actually have seen in my practice, is they saw that parental concern sometimes led to the child starting to develop unhealthy eating patterns when they didn't have those before. So as the parent became concerned, the child gravitated away from healthy food choices towards more unhealthy food choices.
Like rebelling.
Yeah, and you think about why would that happen? But I do think there's a certain type of child that is affected that way. And I have seen those kids in my practice, and they are really strong. Like I think that they tend to be a little older too. And they seem to kind of be clearly making a statement that they're not invested in the parental sense of worth, directly. I mean, I have these conversations with these kids, and a lot of times it's because they're so turned off to what the parent perceives as being healthy. They're so turned off to it because they're turned off to the entire belief system of our value based on our size kind of thing. And so this affects kids that are at a high weight naturally, or kids that weren't at a high weight naturally, either one. But again, that original study showed it didn't matter if they were high weight kids or they're not high weight kids. They're equally affected. They're, by this parental perception. And so you can take a child that doesn't have a high weight and they end up at a high weight.
And it's because the parents force some kind of
something. It's just, I think, and I've seen things too with a lot of times, like, again, moms get blamed. It's the mother's body image. That's not so true. You have both parents can be sources of this. And again, they're innocently doing it because they just think that it's the right thing. But time after time, these studies show that it has the opposite effect. So that's what we're trying to kind of encourage parents to step back and check themselves, relax a little bit about things, and talk to the provider.
It's just,
Relax.
right. It's just like ease up and be a normal person. It's like just don't focus just don't focus all on it. It just, I don't know.
But I think the irony is that the parent thinks they're doing their child
The right thing.
and it has the opposite effect. And this isn't just about parents and kids. In our society in general, I was having lunch the other day with a friend of mine, and I'm sure that he has some form of metabolic syndrome. He works out like a crazy man, and keeps gaining weight. He swims miles a day, and another one of his friends flat out said, "Just put the fork down, man." And it's like, how does, I mean, that is such a common perception. Whenever I see someone who's really overweight in public, my heart goes out to them, because I'm sure that so many people have told them, just put the fork down. And there is clearly something more going on.
I know.
And how we talk to each other about this has a profound impact.
Right.
It really does. And they've shown, again, with the parental comments about body image, about body, about food, about, this appearance stuff, it definitely backfires in terms of self-esteem for the child. They have definitely shown
totally.
that, that confidence and self-esteem just go down the tubes with this type of environment that the kids are in. And they've also shown that there is a connection to eating disorder risk as well in the children. And, we like to say eating disorders aren't caused by, that they're biologic, but the environment does play a role, and it can be in a vulnerable child, a child that's vulnerable to eating disorder development, just starting this way. It could start this way, like those values, and then trying to, as you said, Andrea, like please the parent or do something.
Well, because you're rewarded every time you lose weight. Like for me, every time I would lose the weight, it was like, yay, oh, come on, now we can go shopping and you can get some pretty things. And isn't this great? And everyone would be like, oh, look what she did. Isn't that great?
Yeah, and I think that kids too sometimes are not confident in themselves. And the worst thing I think a parent can do is to affirm their lack of confidence by making a comment. Instead of not doing that. I mean, if a child's like, oh, I'm not happy with my body because X, Y, or Z, the worst thing would be for the parent to agree with them and say, yeah, I could see why you're not happy with that.
But the other, on the flip side, you're not happy with your body when it's that way.
Then that's fine to acknowledge. I hear you. I hear that you're unhappy, but to then say, yeah, I see what you see, that's not acceptable, is just not a good thing. And so I think a lot of these conversations too between parents and healthcare providers should maybe leave the children out at first, because it's very good to include the child for sure. And I've had some appointments where it's really fun because, the first thing I'll talk about is, well, we want you to not be on a diet and just eat like this. And the kids turn around to the parent and they're like, see, I told you. They're just like scolding their parent,
Right.
And then those are all fine because those kids have great relationships with their parents, and it's all fine to have that kind of conversation. But I think if you're in a situation as a parent and you're concerned about your body, your patient's body, if you're concerned about your child's body size, it may be good to reach out first to the provider alone and talk to them if your child's young, because I think you don't want to have that conversation in front of your child necessarily. You can even message your practitioner if you don't want them addressing that during an appointment. You can message them ahead of time and say, I'm bringing my child in and I don't want discussion of this to happen in front of my child. And, that you could set that up separately. I think it's important because so many children are wounded by that kind of discussion in a healthcare setting. If that's the first time they've heard of anything, related to their size, and it's seeming like this is a concern, First of all, kids come in all shapes and sizes. And we have standard ways to say, is this kid in a high weight situation or not? And it's based on what we call BMI percentiles. And they're kind of flawed, but we use them just like BMI is flawed. We use them, but kids come in different body types. Like some are more solid and muscular, and they could weigh a lot more, but not really have a problem. And so,
yeah, and this starts at birth. It's like we get they're in the X percentile, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, is that bad? Is that good? I mean, it starts at birth, literally.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
It does. And that there's these red flags, and that could set a parent off on the wrong track. So a parent could feel really confident, then hear this from a provider, and then they start to try to do those restrictive things subconsciously. And that could then lead right into a problem for their child. So again, I think it's hard. It's a hard area to be in, even as a healthcare provider, because you don't want to overreact to it. But you also do know that there are metabolic issues that if we correct them in childhood, it is so advantageous because the kids do so well with that early intervention. But I think it's putting it back to the metabolism and discussion of that. And that really helps these kids to understand and have more confidence, even when they are affected by problems.
I think for me, it's what I've heard the difference sort of in terms of how healthcare professionals deal with it now as opposed to like when I was growing up. It's the lack of the restriction part that's changed. Instead of the saying, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, this is not for you, this is not for you, and that negative kind of thing, it's more like focusing on what you can eat and how you can have a life, and also how it's not your fault. That is the bigger change.
But has that happened, Andrea? I don't see that happening
No.
in children.
But I hear it as
That's good.
It's starting to. I hear it starting to seep in.
That's great. I mean, if it is, that's wonderful. Because we still hear horror stories even today from parents that have experienced, been shocked themselves with some of the communication that's happened with their children in the healthcare setting. And, so I think that's wonderful that it is changing.
I think the fact that you're even hearing about it at all, that you're hearing about it at all, like in the media, that you can read an article about it, that you can see anything about it, is a major step. Because when I was growing up, nobody ever even heard about that. It was all your fault. It was everything. It was because you ate the wrong thing, you did the wrong thing, you didn't exercise enough. It was all your fault. So the fact that we even hear one little peep is, to me, a step forward.
Yeah. And when we think about these little brains and bodies developing, my gosh, the last thing in the world that we should be doing is withholding nutrition from these little ones and making them feel bad for wanting fuel for their bodies.
Right.
It just seems, I mean, in our context, we've been together for a while now. It just seems so crazy. But again, so many doctors are still holding to calories in, calories out.
Right.
And I guess what I'd love to hear from both of you, advice for parents. Andrea, what would you tell a parent about how to or how not to communicate with their kids when it comes to their body size, their image?
I would say listen to your kids. First of all, I would say if the kid tells you they're hungry, guess what? They probably are. And because I think that that's part of it too. Like I think the restriction part and the no, you can't have that, no, you can't eat, that part is really terrible. And like I know with my little nephew, my great nephew, like if he says he wants a pretzel, I'm like, here you go.
Yeah.
And it's because he's hungry. It's not because he's bored. It's because he's hungry. He's growing. And I think that part is really important. And I also think you just like go with the kid. Like who are they? What are they? Just be that. And if they're having a problem and they're having an issue, just talk to them and support them on who they are. And if they're having a weight issue, like little kids who want to talk about it, I always talk about it with them. I'm like, oh yeah, I was chubby kid too.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I'm sorry, go ahead. Ed.
I was just going to say, knowing that there was somebody else
Yeah.
is always really comforting.
Yeah. And Dr. Cooper, kids are often, you'll hear plenty of stories about kids who were chubby kids and then they had a growth spurt and it went away. And so I'd love to just end things, Dr. Cooper, on just what your best professional and personal advice is. You're a parent. How should we navigate these waters?
I think what Andrea said's right. Listen to your child, like foods that they're craving. Let them, try to make that available for them if they have specific cravings, because their body's talking to them. And that's a way for them to develop that physiologic intuition and respond to the cravings. And they know more about what their body needs than you know, because they're living in it. So, yeah, I think trusting the situation a little bit more and just going with, if they're hungry. But one thing I would say is that sometimes there can be irregular appetite issues that develop from a number of things. One could be just, we talk about mechanical eating and we talk about this ordered eating where you eat throughout the day. But some kids, they rush out of the door without having breakfast. They might not really have eaten their lunch. They're going to have irregular appetite because of that. So anything you can do to just establish normal, consistent eating throughout the day, that's huge. And that once you've done that, you can kind of rely on their cues a little bit more to be, in terms of, in an environment of a healthy metabolic response. So that would be one thing. And then sleep affects our appetite too. And so getting enough sleep is important. So I was just thinking of establishing that those are there just to create that foundation to have a normal response to appetite regulation is good.
Yeah, early on.
But the other thing is there are some kids who really do have a metabolic problem. And sometimes they do have something that's called hyperphagia, or like they're just no matter what, hungry all the time and never satisfied. And so in the old days, and sometimes I see this still done now, people would lock the refrigerator, lock the cabinets. And that's just never going to solve the problem, honestly. You have to find out what's wrong with the child metabolically. Like, why is this happening? Because that's a symptom. And you locking everything up doesn't change the disease progression of the metabolic disease behind that. And so what you really want to do is take that kid to the doctor and explain what's going on. And that would be in a child who's doing the ordered eating, but still has like an extreme appetite that is just really irregular. Then that's a sign that there's a definite metabolic problem there, and it needs to be identified. And it could turn out that it's something related to glucose or insulin levels, or it could be one of those that we've talked about in other episodes, a monogenic obesity disease, where there's a genetic mutation along that metabolic pathway, and that child would need medication and treatment and diagnosis and all that. So we don't want to like minimize that there's never a situation where a parent should be concerned. There sure is. But a lot of what we're trying to address is, not to be overly concerned about normal growth and development and how to know if it's normal or not. Have a conversation with the doctor, maybe not bring it into the arena around your child. I think that's the way to go. And as Mark said, these growth spurts are kind of unpredictable. And if you happen to have a child that's going to be tall, you will definitely see periods where they seem to be like exceeding a normal like weight range, because you gain a certain amount of weight before you grow, and you're going to gain more weight if you're going to grow more. And so it can be a little bit like hard to follow. It's like, oh, whoa, that weight is kind of looks elevated. And then all of a sudden, oh, whoa, they just grew and now it looks normal. And so that's the thing. We need to anticipate what the growth spurt looks like too.
I'm thinking of, I have a nephew on my wife's side of the family, and he was a kind of a chunky kid. He always had his, little belly hanging over his swimsuit. He's now 6'8" and a collegiate pitcher, and is thin as a rail and strong as a horse. But imagine if his parents had started restricting his calories back then. It's like, I think this has been such a really important discussion because, and as you said, Dr. Cooper, if your child has a serious weight problem, there's probably a reason behind it. Go to a provider. If that provider says we need to get them to eat less and exercise more, run. Find a physician who understands metabolic health, because this stuff is solvable. But I think it's just been super important. And Andrea, thanks for being so honest about your life experience. And I'm just so happy that you're in such a good place now.
Right, figured it out.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, thanks, you two. This has been another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.